Welcome back, and thank you for joining me again. In this episode, I will discuss the difference in philosophies between allopathic medicine, also called Western medicine, and herbalism, namely atomism versus vitalism. These two words, atomism and vitalism, may be words that you have heard floated around before, but are not always well defined or explained. As an herbalist, I hold a vitalism viewpoint to healthcare, but I want to provide information that allows you to make your own determination of the approach to medicine that best fits you and your horse. According to Webster's dictionary, atomism is defined as a doctrine that the physical and mental universe is composed of simple, indivisible, minute particles. Well, what exactly does that mean? In common terms, this means that every matter of being, whether living or not, can be broken down into individual pieces. In terms of medicine, atomists believe that every living being can be broken down into its individual parts. For example, organ systems, organs, cells, and eventually down to individual atoms. Similarly, atomists believe that diseases can be isolated to one organ or sometimes to a single cell of the body, and that the disease can be addressed by treating the individual cell, organ, or part of the body where the disease is located. Webster's dictionary defines vitalism as a doctrine that the functions of a living organism are due to a vital principle distinct from physiochemical forces. Well, that definition seems a little confusing if the vital principle is not explained. A vitalist believes that the vital principle is the soul or energy that runs through the living being that cannot be separated from the body, and that also cannot be satisfactorily explained through the laws of physics. In terms of medicine, a vitalist does not disconnect the body from the soul and does not divide the living being into separate parts. The vitalist considers all aspects of the person, or in my case, horse's life, when dealing with an illness or disease. Vitalism has a long history in both Western and non-Western societies. In fact, vitalism has been the predominant approach for the majority of human history. In Western societies, vitalism appears in health writings almost continuously, from the ancient Greeks to contemporary health professionals. Yet, there has been a long history of controversy concerning vitalism that still exists today. Leucippus, around 430 BC, was the first person to describe the atomic theory in an attempt to explain the genesis of matter. Only a small fraction of his work has survived, and he was eventually overshadowed by his student, Democritus, who lived from about 460 to 370 BC, and was considered the expert for the atomic theory. Leucippus and Democritus were physicists. However, their work and philosophy had a tremendous impact on ancient Greek medicine, because the atomic theory offered a new and interesting viewpoint on theories of anatomy, physiology, and research physiology to explain previously unexplainable observations and phenomena. According to the atomic theory, atoms form the matrix of the universe, and everything created is the result of the different order, position, and spin of their complex relation. Another important aspect of the atomic theory is the concept of the vacuum. Without the endless vacuum of space, it would be impossible for any movement to occur. In connection with the vacuum was the basic theory that all atoms were in constant movement, either combining with one another or repelling one another. Movement was viewed as the key to creation, as the atoms were able to combine in different forms and thereby construct everything that was present in the world. Democritus, as a student of Leucippus, taught that the soul was a part of the body and consisted of fine, smooth, round atoms, functioning like fire and spread throughout the body. Later atomists would discount this theory and would separate the body from the soul. Democritus taught that the atoms of the soul could be lost due to atmospheric pressure and were constantly being renewed by the process of inhalation. If the loss was greater than the intake of their formation, the atoms of the soul dispersed and the person died. In the 1st century BC, Asclepiades of Bithynia abandoned the prevailing Hippocratic theory of humors and founded a methodic school of medicine based on the atomism of Heraclides of Pontus, who lived around 388 to 310 BC. Disease, in his view, was a consequence of a disturbance of the normal motions of the body's constituent atoms. The application of atomism to physiology enabled this school to formulate a highly mechanistic view of medicine. During the time of Asclepiades, there existed a division between two schools of philosophical thought and practices of healing. On the one hand, you had the Aesculapian philosophy that embraced a mechanistic view of health and illness, and adopted what we would now consider as a scientific, investigative approach to nature. Within this approach, diseases were considered to have material causes that gave rise to specific symptoms. The other philosophy of healing was the Hygiean philosophy that was based on the philosophical principle of vis meditrix naturae, which adopted a holistic, vitalistic approach to health, did not separate the mind and the body, and believed that the body had natural healing processes and that healthcare providers simply facilitated these natural healing processes. Among the Greek philosophers, the conflict between atomists, also known as mechanists, and vitalists is evident in the disagreement between Democritus and Aristotle. Democritus' deterministic theory proposed that nature, including humans, consisted of atoms. Aristotle's vitalistic theory proposed that living organisms consisted of a primordial substance, often referred to as the soul, and form, which transformed it into a specific thing. Even though the atomic theory was proposed by well-respected scientists of the day, it wasn't readily accepted by everyone. Plato, who lived from 428 to 348 BC, was a staunch opponent of the atomic theory as proposed by Democritus, and was also a sharp critic of Democritus's work. Despite his opposition, in a remarkable passage in his own words, Plato describes the movement of substances through the tissues and organs, especially in connection with the digestive processes in an atomist viewpoint. Plato speaks of nutritive particles and blood particles. He attributed old age and death to changes in the structure of the primary particles and the subsequent dissolution of interparticle bonding. The Asclepiades doctrines appear to have enjoyed some popularity among physicians until the time of Galen. The death of atomism in the ancient world was a protracted affair. The doctor responsible for the demise of atomism was none other than Galen. Galen rejected the absurd molecules of Asclepiades and reverted back to Hippocratic vitalism. His organismic physiology routed atomism from its last foothold in Western thought, that is, at least until the Renaissance. The Aristotelian worldview, also shared by Galen and Paracelsus, was the dominant worldview throughout Europe until the 16th century. It is important to note that in the Aristotelian worldview, soul and body were not considered separate, but as insoluble parts of a whole. It is only later, with the works of philosophers Bernardino Telesio, who lived from 1509 to 1587, and René Descartes, who lived from 1596 to 1650, that separation of mind or soul and body were introduced. In Descartes' worldview, organisms are machines and everything about them can be explained by the laws of mechanics and physics, a viewpoint that would later come to predominate medicine. Despite the atomic theory being put forth as early as 400 BC, it did not become the predominant viewpoint in medicine and pharmacology until the 1600s. Prior to the 1600s, the teachings of Hippocrates and Galen were dominant. Hippocrates and Galen were vitalists, and both looked at more than the disease or complaint of the patient when making their diagnoses and administering their treatments. Hippocrates looked at the balance of the four humors of the body, that is, black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. When the humors were unbalanced, disease and sickness arose, and the role of the physician and his chosen remedies was to restore the body back to balance, a tenet of vitalism. Galen took Hippocrates' teachings further and put together a rigid system of compounding and using plant-based and other remedies to treat the patient. The first significant challenge to the selection of remedies that subscribed to the doctrines of Galen and his vitalism theory came in the 16th century from apothecaries who were seeking the active ingredients in plants, minerals, and animal products. A large number of alchemists at the time were seeking better remedies to treat disease. They were seeking a cure-all drug. Medical alchemists emphasized distillation as the most useful method to extract the active ingredient from the inactive dross. For example, Paracelsus proposed extracting the essence from substances. Other medical alchemists contributed to the challenge of finding the active ingredient and eventually overthrew the traditional Galenist doctrines by the end of the next century. Slowly, the concept that each disease should be treated with a specific remedy was beginning to contradict the old notions of treatment. By the mid-1500s, the four humors theory of medicine was being relegated to oblivion as the cause of disease, and a similar change in attitude was developing toward Aristotle's four elements theory. One idea that was gaining followers proposed that there were three basic elements of all structures: salts, sulfurs, and mercuries. The salt of a substance was the ash remaining after the alchemist removed the sulfur of the substance by fire. Paracelsus and his followers were known to support this theory. At the beginning of the next century, D'Espagnet wrote in 1623 that he was skeptical of the idea of these elements and thought it might be true that all bodies were composed of atoms, referring to the atomist theory of Democritus. In the 17th century, atomists began to step forward, declaring their preference for Democritus over Aristotle. Among the more important of these early atomists was Daniel Sennert, who lived from 1572 to 1637 and was a professor of medicine at Wittenberg. Sennert recognized the importance of chemistry in medical practice and the convenience of the atomic theory in accounting for chemical processes. His views seemed to be an intermediate between that of Democritus and Aristotle, which led to the development of modern chemistry and the understanding of atoms as having subatomic particles, like protons, neutrons, and electrons. The 17th century saw the revival of Democritian atomism, and it marked the beginning of a scientific atomic theory. This is important because scientific atomic theory is fundamental to modern medicine, as this theory underpins the medical community's understanding of how substances interact within the body, how drugs work, and how medical imaging techniques function. During the 17th and 18th centuries, scientists began to use the atom to explain various observations in nature. Isaac Newton explained the expansion of gases as the rush of atoms into empty space, and John Dalton developed his atomic theory based on several experiments analyzing the properties of gases. Despite the findings of Newton and Dalton, the existence of atoms was doubted by many until the discovery of subatomic particles in the 20th century. These discoveries led to the development of X-rays, nuclear medicine, and MRIs. These sciences are now applied to diagnose and treat diseases such as cancer in the form of radiation. The division between the Aesculapian and Hygiean schools of thought continues to influence today's healthcare practices and systems. Each school of thought continues to exist in modern science. Western medicine represents an essentially Aesculapian worldview, and herbology and other traditional-based healthcare professions, commonly referred to as complementary or alternative medicine, represents a Hygiean worldview. By the mid-20th century, Western medicine had lost the connection to vitalism, while complementary or alternative medicine continues to be very philosophically based. The continued study of anatomy, physiology, and molecular biology over the past 600 years has led us to the current state in which the atom is now the anatomy of the 21st century. We have been reduced from sentient beings to groups of atoms. Scientists are now working to bridge the gap between the subatomic, molecular, and genomic levels by forming an atomic theory of disease, which states that alterations in the composition of subatomic particles are the root cause of disease. The daily use of subatomic particles is gaining momentum in the diagnosis and treatment of disease. However, the next step will be to demonstrate that the origin of disease emanates from diseased atoms with a pathologic distribution of subatomic particles, resulting in pathophysiology at the molecular and cellular level. Personally, I don't ever want to be looked at as just a group of atoms, and I will never look at a human, horse, or any other sentient being as just a group of atoms. The vitalism principle of health is that the physician merely facilitates the body's healing, whereas in Western medicine, healing generally occurs because of the therapy itself, like drugs, surgical removal, and so on. These differences in principles lead to a different logic about treatment. In natural medicine, the focus is on treating the whole patient whose total being, mind, body, spirit, then initiates the healing process. In Western medicine, the focus is on treating the disease and ignores the connection between the mind, body, and spirit, focusing on the disease and the physical body of the patient. I take issue with disassociating the mind from the body. How many times have you heard someone say she worried herself sick? There is clearly a mind-body connection to disease. As another example, a person becomes physically injured and later develops depression. As a vitalist, I would work with the person to address not only the physical injury, but also the mind. On the other hand, Western medicine would send the person to one doctor to treat the physical injury and to someone else entirely to treat the mind. The intent of conventional medicine is to cure patients. The intent of herbalism is to assist the patients to heal themselves, to treat disease by restoring health. As a master herbalist, I view my role as taking a very thorough history of the horse that includes their age, sex, work history, living conditions, social interactions, hauling schedule, previous health concerns and issues, current concerns and issues, and expectation or goals from the owner when determining an herbal protocol or formula for that horse. My goal is to provide the herbal tools to the horse so that the horse can heal itself, with the eventual goal that the horse will no longer need supplementation. Vitalists express a preference for natural remedies, modalities, and medicines. This is associated with a set of philosophical principles that may be expressed as 1. The body is built on nature's order and it has a natural ability to heal itself. 2. This natural healing is reinforced by the use of natural remedies. 3. The natural healing should not be tampered with unnecessarily through the use of drugs or surgery. And 4. Where possible, we should look to nature and to natural substances and processes for therapeutic interventions. As an herbalist, I feel that if the body is capable of healing itself, the role of the therapy is simply to support and stimulate the process. As a student of osteopathy, another complementary modality, I will paraphrase Andrew Still, the founder of osteopathy, who stated, "Health comes from within or not at all, and health providers can no more give the patient health than they can give the patient honesty." Despite the historical debates and attacks on vitalism, and despite the predictions about the death of vitalism, it has proven to be quite resilient. Vitalism has operated throughout the history of ideas as a force against which mechanism, reductionism, and Western philosophies of medicine have had to defend themselves. Hence, vitalism continues to exist because it is necessary for its opponents to continually refute it. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode. Next week, I will dive into synergy and how herbs work. As always, I welcome your comments and suggestions for this podcast. If you feel so inclined, I would be grateful if you shared this podcast. Please give this podcast a like, share, or subscribe to the channel. You can find the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple, and iHeartRadio. Again, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to meeting up with you again next week.